Always appreciate coming on your show and talking Gators on non-Gator airwaves. But yeah, I mean, like you said, it's not fun not having a bowl game. It's not something that we're used to. And down in Gainesville, it's a little bit different, I guess, than it is in Columbia. I don't really mean that as a slight or a shot to you guys. It's just that, I mean, Florida is a program that's won 3 national titles in the last 25, 30 years, expects to be in bowl games every year as an absolute minimum. And in most cases, 8-4, 9-3 isn't really something to celebrate. It's, be in contention for national title or the season's a failure for most fans in most seasons. Obviously, things are going in such a way now in Gainesville that we have had to lower our expectations. And I'm sure that's kind of what we're going to get into now.
Yeah, Neil, I want to start there since you bring it up. Like, how weird is it? Because I think you and I are around the same age. Like, how weird is it to see Florida football in the state that it's in? Because growing up, I mean, anybody who's a 90s baby or late 80s or whatever, like, all you know is dominance when it comes to Florida Gators football. And my first memories are, of course, Chris Leak and Ron Zook. And I think even some Gator fans would label those as dark days right after Spurrier. But then in comes Urban Meyer. You win the national championship. And I mean, it's off and running yet again. So you had the 90s with Spurrier. Then you had Urban Meyer. Like, again, all we knew was Florida Gators football being dominant. Now we're talking about getting to a bowl game. Like how weird is that? How much of an adjustment is that for you in Gator Nation to, like, even be having these conversations?
Very strange. Very, very, very strange. I mean, I guess the first part of it is that the decline, I guess, both happened fast and it both happened gradually at the same time. Like, because from 2009 to 2010, all right, there's the big drop off. You're 13-1. You're just coming off that loss to Alabama in the SEC title game, and then the next year 8-5, and then you go to Muschamp, and then within a couple of years you're 4-8, and you're like, well, 5 years ago we won the national title, and now we lose twice as many games as we win in the course of 1 year. So in that sense, the decline happened almost overnight, but it was sporadic in another way too, in that, like, there were at least elements of championship level football that Muschamp brought. Like, he could recruit defensive players at a level that I don't think anyone else could top. Like, his defensive recruiting was on par with that of a championship caliber program. So we were still churning out top NFL draft picks. Like, Dante Fowler was the first top 5 NFL draft pick. So, like, all right, you still have some elements there. Maybe the next guy can come in and, I don't know, win with it, because he took over a team that had a lot of talent left over from the Muschamp recruiting classes. And, he did kind of. McElwain won the SEC East, which we now saw was just a mirage because the East was so bad. Georgia wasn't what they are now, and Tennessee wasn't really a factor. And South Carolina, I guess at that point was just coming off the Spurrier heyday, so they weren't really much of a factor either. So it was more him just taking advantage of a bad division. But we were, as Gator fans, kind of thinking, all right, well, it's not great, but okay, we're still winning the East. We're still getting to Atlanta. That is the goal. So we can't be too upset about it. But then it's just completely craters. There are culture issues with McElwain. The strength and conditioning program is so bad that players themselves didn't even trust the strength coaches to do their jobs. And this is before the days of NIL, by the way. They would go out and they would pay out of their own pockets local strength people, like local strength coaches, to help get them more ready for football, which is unheard of nowadays. And from there, you have a credit card fiasco where you have guys suspended for credit card fraud. Honestly, just a couple of guys making some bad choices and then kind of just trickling down from there. Other younger freshmen and, I guess, transfers who are new to the program, just trying to make a good name for themselves and be a team player and all that and ingratiate themselves to their teammates. Whatever. Bad culture permeates the whole roster. Then Mullen comes in, he fixes it, at least on the surface. That issue taken care of, but then he burns out. And now there's another culture problem, only this time it stems from the fact that the coaching staff isn't really 10 toes in on the development of the players and getting the results that they're supposed to. Dan Mullen, I mean, the best way to illustrate this is that Dan Mullen signed himself to a contract extension in 2021 after the Cotton Bowl loss, where Florida got obliterated by your now former quarterback Spencer Rattler, 55-20, and he extended his own contract, didn't do a damn thing to extend any of his assistant coaches' contracts. And that sent a message, because everyone knows, like, all right, if you're extending your own contract, you're getting yourself a little bit more money, you do nothing to help any of your assistants, you're clearly not in it for the long haul. And then there's other rumors, like Adam Schefter put out a statement like Dan Mullen is open to going to the coach. Dan Mullen at Florida is open to coaching in the pro ranks. And there's just clue after clue and hint after hint, like, all right, this is fundamentally broken. Napier comes in. I think he's done some things to fix that. I mean, there's the story that came out right away when he gets to Gainesville. He fixes the parking situation for the players, which if you've ever been to Gainesville, you know is a terrible situation. Fixes the food situation. The players have been complaining that the quality of the food wasn't great. So he's done some things there, and he has recruited to a degree that I think Gator fans are expecting and hoping for. But with all those other issues now on top of them, now you've got NIL and the transfer portal, and Napier hasn't quite adjusted, I don't think, to it. And then there's lastly the fact that he didn't make a pair of moves after the 22 season that I really thought he was going to make, and I thought he really should have made. That was hire an offensive coordinator to help remove one of the many hats that he wears on game days, and didn't do that. And then hire a special teams coach. Because if you, Chris, I'm sure you remember this, Florida hammered South Carolina in 2022. And despite that, Florida could not possibly have played a worse game on special teams. They did everything wrong you could have possibly done. Xavier Henderson fumbles a punt. We have one field goal blocked. We have another field goal where we can't even put the ball down for the kicker. Big punt touchdown. After a timeout, we give him a 40-yard punt return to Josh Van, and then we give him a nice face mask at the end of it, all in the span of one game. And the next week we lose to Vanderbilt because – well, Jason Marshall tried to catch a punt in his own end zone and didn't do it. So it's every single one of those pieces all coming together. Now, all the failures from the Muschamp, the McElwain, and then at the end of the Mullen tenure, now on to the Napier issues that he has added on to the pile that we're dealing with. So now when you look at all that, it's like, well, yeah, I'm not surprised.
So looking back, Neil, specifically at the 2023 season, it really feels like it was a tale of almost two halves of this season. I mean, obviously, Florida had a tough one opening up at Utah, lose that one 24-11. And by the way, going in, right, the expectations were low, at least from the outside looking in. Maybe in Gainesville, not so much, but the Vegas over-under was 5 or 5.5, and a lot of folks were picking Florida to miss a bowl game. Some people even projected that maybe Billy Napier would get fired, which I think most of us with level heads realized that was probably never going to happen when you factored in the $30+ million buyout. Either way, though, there was some optimism, right? You bring in a new quarterback, and I thought Graham Mertz was much, much better than most folks expected, most notably me, who had him ranked 14th in the SEC quarterback rankings, which I'd ate crow, as I should have. But either way, Florida, first half of the season, you beat Tennessee. I know you had that ugly loss at Kentucky, but I thought you got that back with the win at South Carolina. Florida sitting 5-2, right? I mean, it looked really promising that the Gators would make a bowl game, but then the stretch of Georgia, Arkansas, LSU, Mizzou, and Florida State. Florida loses all 5 of those games. And of course, Neil, I'm sure the Arkansas game is the one at home that stands out with the all-black uniforms, 39-36. Special teams played a role in that one yet again. You also lose 33-31 at Mizzou. Talk about the season as a whole. I mean, again, it looked like Florida was in prime position to at least get to a bowl game and have something to feel good about right now. How disappointing was that final stretch of 5 games? And I feel like it had to be accentuated by that loss to Arkansas, which really was the exclamation point, if you will, on a bad year.
Well, the warning signs were there. The warning signs from early in the year were there. The fact that we didn't just lose to Kentucky, we got embarrassed by Kentucky, who does not recruit from the same pool of talent that Florida recruits from. They don't just win because, I don't know, there's a bad call or a field goal doinks off the upright and goes in, or some kind of luck where there's a long bomb and the guy catches it with his toe tapping down just inside the white line. No, they just came and they ate our lunch for 60 minutes. And Ray Davis goes for almost 300 yards because we can't control the line of scrimmage or even begin to understand gap control. So that was frightening. And the game most people are going to forget was Charlotte. And I understand that the defense was actually fairly good in that game. They only gave up 7 points, but there were some plays, even still. I know they won 22-7, so everyone's going to go, well, the offense didn't do its job. The offense couldn't score in the red zone. But there were plays where they let Jalen Jones escape the pocket. They let him get outside. There were missed tackles. There were plays where our defensive linemen just got slung down like Barbie dolls. And you look at that and you go, well, okay, that's Charlotte. Now, what's the SEC going to do to us? So, yeah, we got up for Tennessee and we beat them. We should have. That's a rivalry game. I'm sure our players were sick and tired of hearing about how we never beat rivals under Napier. Under the lights in the swamp, a night game. Yeah, that's great. But you can't keep that up. And that shows that it's just, honestly, it's fake juice. It's not who you are. It doesn't show a real process that fans can objectively believe in. It shows that you can objectively get up and give a good team a fight, but then right when the level of competition drops, your level of play will also drop. And that's where I said, okay, Florida's either going to figure this out or they're going to lose to a team they shouldn't after that Charlotte game. Well, I thought it would be Vanderbilt, but it turned out to be Arkansas. So I was wrong and I was right at the same time. But there's no way to defend it. You can't lose to an Arkansas team that's 4-8 on your home field. It's unacceptable. It's inexcusable. And of course, what was the catalyst for the loss? Special teams, which we just talked about a minute ago. Well, maybe if you'd hired a real special teams coach and didn't have a quality control assistant, basically an intern handling those duties, you wouldn't have had a situation where in a 2-minute drill, a Chinese fire drill, if you will, you're trying to get to the line of scrimmage and spike the ball after a first down that you are now in field goal range, spike the ball and run your field goal team on. Well, our field goal team runs on as the offense is lining up to try to spike the ball. That, as has been part of a theme for the Florida Gators this year, is more than 11 players. That is an obvious substitution penalty. 5 yards back, Trace Mack's field goal now misses just to the right, and had it been 5 yards closer, that ball is going in. Didn't happen that way. So, again, you look at these avoidable mistakes that you could have prevented in the offseason. And a lot of Gator fans, I'm sure, are going to talk about the 4th and 17 at Missouri, about LSU putting 700 yards of offense on us, which is insane. Like with the new clock rules in place now, where you get like 2 or 3 fewer possessions a game, 700 yards is bad for 2 games. But that's beside the point. The play calling, which also cost us against FSU, and the special teams fiascos that let us down against Arkansas and Utah in the first game of the season are things that I look at and I go, okay, Billy Napier, had he been proactive, would have caught these things ahead of time. He would have addressed them before they came back to bite us in a second year. He didn't do it. And that's where the cause for concern is. I would say the frustration is just the fact that we lost those games, but we can move on and go, okay, 2024, big recruiting class coming in. We got Lagway, even though he won't play as a freshman. But we have this talent coming back. We should be good for the most part. But that's the concern moving forward. It's not a matter of let's just beat the dead horse. Yeah, we lost 5 games in a row, which should never happen. I'm genuinely concerned about the future now.
Speaking of the future, Neil, we'll get in the 2024 schedule in a second, but what is Napier doing when it comes to special teams coordinator, offensive coordinator? Are those moves being made? I mean, are they what's the latest in regards to what Billy Napier is doing behind the scenes?
Yeah, that's the problem. He doesn't have any moves right there, or at least announced that he does. He does work in silence to some degree. There is something to be said for that. I will say that I like it that he doesn't let a lot of things slip out. I think that there is some positive to that. But on the other hand, it's also now 2 days before National Signing Day, and you still have those 2 offensive line coaches who, if we're just being honest, did not do a good job this past season. And the fact that we have 2 offensive line coaches means that we don't have room for a special teams coordinator. So it's a catch-22. Like which piece of the puzzle do you want to plug in here? Like, do you want a special teams coordinator, or do you want to have 2 offensive line coaches? Because there are only so many spots, obviously, that you can have for paid assistant coaches on your staff. And maybe he's doing something in the background behind all of our backs, but as of right now, there's no smoke about that.
In regards to the transfer portal, how do you feel like Billy Napier is handling that? I know the big one obviously was Trevor Etienne. That kind of set Gator Nation off. I feel like we even talked about Florida last week on the show because I felt like I could not get on social media, X specifically, without seeing people and yourself obviously posting about Florida and Napier. And it just felt like last week shit hit the fan. Of course, then the rumors come up he might go to Georgia, which makes it even worse. a couple of big portal commitments over the last couple of days. I saw you guys got a defensive back from Oregon State, defensive lineman from Pitt. What's the mood and the feeling and the vibe right now on what Billy Napier is doing in the transfer portal?
Yeah, so we have Wright State, wrong program, Penn, Ivy League, Joey Slackman. Fun fact, actually, my dad went to Penn, and I mean, I used to live in New Jersey before I moved down to Charleston. So I went to a couple of Penn games, and I saw him play a couple years ago before I even had any idea that he was going to come to Florida. I just wanted to see Penn play. And my impression of him in that game 2 years ago, actually there were two. There was one at Columbia, and there was one where they were home against Dartmouth. And my impression of him in those games was he looks better than the average athlete around him on the field. I don't know that he's going to be an NFL player, but he definitely looks like he could be, I don't know, he looks like he could play for a Power 5 program. And this was as a sophomore before he really took off this past year. Now, watching the film that he's put out as a junior, he had a breakout year at Penn this past year in 2023. And I think that Gator fans have every reason to be excited about him. There's going to be some eye rolling. Well, you took a guy from the FCS, a guy from the Ivy League. They don't even have scholarships. But I think that he's a guy that's going to come in and work and work and work. And he'll just be that guy that goes through a wall for you. And I think Florida really needs that. So that one is good. Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon from San Diego State, a good piece at the offensive line. It's not going to be like adding an Osiris Torrance like we did a couple years ago, obviously for many reasons, not the least of which is that he is not going to be a first-round draft pick, but he is a respectable piece on the offensive line. He's proven that at his position at San Diego State. And I think the difference here between him and a guy like a Damian George we brought in this past year was that we're bringing him in to fill the same position on the offensive line. At least I believe that's what's going to happen. I don't know. Maybe Napier will change his mind on that, but that's what it seems like it's going to be. That he'll come in and play on the offensive line where he played at San Diego State, whereas Damian George had to kind of shift positions from guard to tackle, and he's not really mobile enough to be able to do that. He couldn't do it. He couldn't handle it at an offensive tackle in the SEC, whereas guard, you don't have to move around as much or be as quick on your feet. So I think keeping that natural position more might help him, and letting George play more inside could help there. So then you get kind of two additions by one. And I mean, now we have Bridges from Oregon. That's a good corner who can come up and make tackles, both in the run game and knock away passes when the ball's in the air. He's got good ball instincts there. I like that pickup too. I think the problem is that Napier and Florida kind of spent 3 weeks just stuck in park, like fiddling around with a gear stick, and then finally figuring out, oh, this is drive, and then slamming on the accelerator. Now they're going 180 miles an hour. But there were still misses that Florida had in the transfer portal. And I think Gator fans have every right to be frustrated about them. I think it's a difficult game to play too, because you don't know who is going to be entering the portal later. So I understand that aspect of wanting to be patient and waiting. But again, because Florida at this point now with Bridges, they're still at a delta of minus 14 in the transfer portal. And everyone's going to be at a net of below zero now because everyone's entering the portal. Not everyone's found new homes yet. But to be in the minus teens in it's late mid-late December now isn't really great. And you're going to be relying on a lot of guys entering the portal coming to you. And if you don't hit on them, then you wind up having to fill your roster with backup spots or with backup options. And that is where we have problems like we saw, without naming names. We saw game tape this year. There were some plays against Missouri where there were guys who, frankly, probably don't belong on an SEC field. If we're just keeping it as respectful and polite as possible, I think the objective way to say it is there were just a lot better players out there we could have had than the guys that we did. Those guys hurt us by not making plays. So that's what's going to keep happening if you rely on the portal and you keep missing. Like Napier's backed himself into a corner here. Like, yeah, sure, he could right the ship now. He could hit on the later portal guys, but you better, because if you don't, you have no recourse.
So, Neil, that brings me to the 2024 schedule, and it's interesting because Billy Napier enters what feels like a must-win type of year, a year where his seat is scorching hot, at least in Gainesville, year 3 of his tenure, and the 2024 schedule I mean, it's safe to say it's a murderer's row. Again, that's not going to be an excuse, but it is. 11 Power 5 opponents. You've got the one non-con game against Samford. Outside of that, you've got Miami, UCF, and Florida State. And then you've got an SEC schedule, which features Texas A&M, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, at Texas, LSU, and Ole Miss. What is the minimum expectation for 2024 for Billy Napier, for the Billy Napier era to continue? Is it getting to a bowl game? Is it 7-5? Is it more than that? And in your mind, way too early, do you think Billy Napier can meet those expectations? Because again, even if you had a really, 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 really good team and you were a really, really good coach, having a good season with that schedule would be a tough ask. Like, it almost feels like we're putting Billy Napier in a position to where he's almost set up for failure. Is that too much? I don't know. But in your mind, your opinion, what does he have to do in 2024 to come back?
I think the first thing he has to do is beat the teams he's supposed to beat. I think the conversation around him right now is very, very different. If in year one he's 8-4 as opposed to 6-6, and in year two he's 7-5 as opposed to 5-7. In year one, there's no excuse to lose to that Kentucky team. Sorry, no, unacceptable to lose to that Kentucky team in the swamp, and then to lose to Vanderbilt. No, can't have it. Unacceptable. Period. Point blank. End of conversation. Can't have that. So that would change that conversation, because then you could say, well, all right, 8-4, that's an improvement over 6-6. You beat the teams you were supposed to beat. The talent isn't that great because everyone that's been the blanket excuse from Gator fans who have unlimited patience for Billy Napier that, well, Dan Mullen left him with no talent. To a degree, that's true. He did leave you with a top 5 NFL draft pick at quarterback, but for the most part, fair enough. But he didn't leave you with so little talent that you should have gone 6-6. Nor did he leave you with so little talent that in his second year, he should have gone 5-7. There was no excuse to lose to Arkansas. There was no excuse to get destroyed by Kentucky. On the road, weird things can happen. Again, if you lose that game late on a field goal, I can tolerate it. I'm not happy, but I can live with it. And I know Missouri's in the New Year's Six, but you shouldn't have lost that game. You were with your backup quarterback late in the game, had a chance to win. Had you converted a 4th and 17, you win that game. So even if you just flip the Missouri of 23, the Arkansas game of 23, you let the Kentucky loss this past year stand, and then you flip the Kentucky and the Vanderbilt results in his first year, it's all drastically different. But that's not the situation we're in. Instead, we're looking at a coach who's 11-14 right now. And if you say that he's going to go 6-6 and keep his job, I just don't see that. I don't know why you would look at a coach who, A, doesn't get any better from the point at which his predecessor left him, which was 6-6, B, regresses from year one to year two. I mean, most coaches who are going to succeed have a jump in year one to year two. He got worse. And he got lucky. That South Carolina game, I mean, only because Ricky Pearsall and Trey Wilson teamed up for the Immaculate Reception Part 2 did you survive that. So, like, the luck and the close game thing goes the other way there. But then again, 3, you show no progress when you do have your guys in there. The whole thing being Napier doesn't have talent. Mullen left him in a bad spot. Well, if in his third year, he's still not doing any better than Dan Mullen, there's no way you can blame Mullen for this anymore, because it would be almost, if not entirely, all Napier guys. And I think it will be, because I guess with the exception of, I mean, Florida's probably going to get Michael Tarquin back. So say the pundits, who was an offensive lineman from the Mullen tenure, who played in 2022. So I guess that's a Mullen piece. But the overwhelming majority of the players in 24 are going to be Napier's guys. So 6-6 to me is unacceptable. 7-5, I think it becomes a conversation. Like, how bad were the losses? Were you competitive? Did you beat yourself? Could you count to 11? Did you have 2 guys with the same jersey number run on the field at once? That's where it's like up for debate. And if the losses are at least in the ballpark, like if you play Georgia to like a 38-24 type loss, all right, fine. But you can't lose 41-3 to them. Same with at Texas. Play that game competitively. And you don't lose the teams that you're supposed to beat. 8-4 better, I think he's safe. Conversation's done. There's no talk about firing him at that point.
Neil, last thing before we get you out of here, man. It's been an electric conversation. To the hardwood, what's the outlook for Gators men's basketball this year?
Optimistic, for sure. Optimistic. I think that there is reason to be optimistic. We did land a nice transfer portal class there. I don't know exactly what this team is capable of because I don't think they played enough games to be able to judge them by that. But I mean, Tyrese Samuel is a guy that kind of saved us against ECU. So that was a nice pickup there. I mean, he can clean up some boards and put the ball back in nice and easy. Oh, your offensive possession doesn't work? Well, there's 2 points because you have a big guy now. That's cool. Walter Clayton's a guy that can finish. He can score from the outside too. I just like his overall game. I worry, though, that, again, there's going to be the same problem as I just talked about with the football team, where the level of play kind of rises and dips based on the level of opponent that you play. Because Virginia is a respectable team. There's no one upset about that loss. And you got up for FSU, you pounded their faces, and you conquered them. You cut the heads off, whatever. Fine, great, rivalry game. Well, then you play against ECU, and that's a team that's, as of that game, was 265 in the net. Lost to SC Upstate. And you need Samuel to clean up a miss to survive that one. I don't know. We're going to have to see if this team can up its level of play on a consistent basis. But I think if they do, I think if Walter Clayton continues taking strides, I think if Riley Kugel steps up into an even bigger role this year, I think Florida will be a tournament team. But again, they're going to have to avoid those bad losses because, I mean, last year they got swept by Vandy. Like, that can't happen if you're going to be a tournament team. It's just a matter of what's the consistent level of product you put on the floor. Are you going to be able to get up for big opponents and beat them like we did last year against Tennessee and FSU, but then not be able to cut it against teams like Vanderbilt because you let your guard down? But I don't know. TBD, up in the air. Ask me again in like a month, and then we can have a more fair conversation about that.
And we will definitely plan on doing that. Excuse me. Neil Shulman in allkindsofweather.com. Neil, one of the best in the business when it comes to talking all things Florida Gators. Neil, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year's to you and yours, my friend. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, and let's definitely do it again soon.
Yes, sir. You as well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. You're the man, Neil. I appreciate it.